In this video, we're going to look at the second most important method for beginning drawing students, and that is the concept of sightlines. Sightlines is about understanding the relationship of objects to each other. So if you're drawing a collection of objects, how do you get them into the right place? And this also assists with proportions, because when they're in the right place in relationship to each other, then hopefully the proportions are correct. I'll explain what I mean. So the first thing we're going to do is you're going to be working from this image. All right, so this is the image you're going to be drawing in contour, line only, just like you did last week. But you're going to be putting your your sight lines onto the picture. So I'll talk you through that. So what are sight lines? If we look at this image, there are certain relationships between the objects. So for example, if you look at the bottom, if we were to draw a straight line that touches the bottom of the bowl, a horizontal line across your paper, it tells us something very important. It tells us that the ball is higher than that. All right. So if you know that, if you're looking at something and you see that relationship, then you cannot put the ball on the line or below the line. You have to have a little bit of a gap. And this is really important looking at these lines that are on the bottom of objects, and as we're going to see, is at the top of objects. So this red line is a sight line. And sight lines are horizontal and they're vertical. Very rarely can they be diagonal, because they have to connect at least 3 points for them to make any sense. You can always connect it diagonal with 2 points. So horizontal lines, what we're going to use, and vertical lines, what we're going to use. So we keep going. We notice that the top of the ellipse cuts through the cylinder at roughly halfway. So if you find that the ellipse of your cylinder is here, there's a mistake. Now it's either this is off or this is off, which is why you have to start off very carefully. So let's say you were drawing this drawing. First thing you would do is draw this object and get this in proportion and get this 100% correct. Then everything that comes off of it should, in theory, be in proportion. But if this was too tall and skinny or too short and wide, everything around it is going to be wrong. All right, so spend the time getting your object right. And then when you start putting things in, you know things like, well, that cylinder, the halfway point is right where the top of the bowl is. And if we keep going, we see other things, like the top of the ball has to be below the bottom of the ellipse. So if you're drawing your ball and you got the bottom right, but you went too high and you came across and you saw, oh, it's in the middle of my ellipse, that's a piece of information that's extremely valuable to you. All right, so you can put sight lines anywhere that's meaningful. A sight line at the top of this bottle is kind of useless. It doesn't tell us anything because the top of the bottle doesn't relate to anything else in the image. All right, but sight lines on the top here tell us about this relationship. Bottom lines are really, really important. Put another one here. We look at the bottom of the cylinder. We see that the bottle is higher than that, so they cannot be on the same line. And we know that when it cuts through the ball, it's a little bit lower than halfway. So in a funny sort of way, when you look at a collection of objects, it's like taking a quiz or a test, and only you have the answers right in front of you. These are the answers. Everything you need to know is right there. What you need to know are the techniques and the tricks to decode this information, to see gaps here and gaps there and gaps here, and who's bigger and who's smaller, etc. The top of the ellipse really doesn't give us a lot of information because it just intersects here. But if you had your curve of your bottle down here, you'd know you were wrong. All right, and you can also do vertical lines. So if I go back to my bowl again and cut a vertical line in here, touching the edge, you'll notice that it's not in the middle of the cylinder, and there's a little bit of a gap here. And if I keep going, you notice that this one kind of runs through the middle of the top of the bottle. Now, you'll notice an interesting distortion here. The bottle is not straight. It's got a bit of an angle, whereas everything else appears to be relatively straight. This is actually an artifact of the camera. Because this is done with an iPhone or a cell phone camera, there's a lot of bend and distortion, especially things on the edges of the picture tend to angle in at the bottom. So if I had a bottle over here, it would be angling the opposite direction. The best way to avoid this is to have a proper SLR camera or regular film camera. To be at a greater distance, etc. So we are going to get these problems. What I want you to do in this class, however, is to pretend they're not there. In other words, make your bottles straight. Everything that's vertical in your picture should be vertical in your drawing. Okay, so even though, if you were actually standing in front of this, you'd see that this is actually straight, but the camera has distorted it slightly. That's not just the camera's fault. It's complicated. It has to do with the viewpoint and the focal point and all of that, but don't worry about it. If you see something like this happening, unless there's something underneath the bottle here propping it up, it should be straight. So I'm going to ask you, when you do this drawing, to fix the camera effect and just make it straight. All right, so that's going to come up. You'll see that a few times in a lot of the stuff we'll be working with in this class. And then finally, if I put a vertical line on the side of this ball again here, there must be a gap there. And you can also see this is slightly distorted. It's wider at the bottom than the top. Okay, so those are sight lines. Very simple concept. Very hard to pay attention to. So what I'm going to have you do in your drawings is actually draw these lines in with a pencil and a ruler. So let's test this. Let's see what we did. You drew this as your diagnostic drawing. What I'd like you to do is get this drawing out, get a ruler out, and we're going to test the sight lines. So you can pause this video now. Okay, so if you have your drawing, what I'd like you to do is establish a sight line that touches the top of the bowl and cuts horizontally. So you've got to make this line completely horizontal. Try not to angle it up or down. And you'll notice certain things like the tip of this spout comes very close to the line, and where the handle comes out is where it touches the body. All right? If we keep going, we see that the top of this little ceramic cup is lower than the ellipse here. It seems to touch close to where the inside of the handle hits the body of the jug here. We notice that the top of this is above the fabric. Okay, there's a little bit of a gap here, cuts into the upper third of the cup. Sometimes you only get a little piece of information, sometimes there's a lot of information. We look at the bottom here, we notice that this is lower. I know many of you, when I looked at your examples, these two are on the same line. All right, they can't be, and then this is even higher. Interesting thing about drawings is the higher the line up the paper, if we're looking at the bottom, the further back it is. So this is lower, so it's closer to us. This is further back, so it's higher up the paper. All right. If I do a vertical line through the end of the handle, it should run roughly through the middle of that piece of fruit. And if I put a line through the middle of this object, it lines up perfectly with the corner, with the edge of that bowl. All right, so look what you did in your drawing. Take these lines, draw them right on top of your drawing, and just make a mental note. How do I pay attention to this in the future? So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be working with this drawing right here. You can draw all of your construction lines, your ellipses, your central axes in pencil. I want you to draw in all of the lines that are useful to you, the verticals, the horizontals. Use a ruler, make them really straight, and then outline your objects just like we did last week using vine charcoal. Okay, but keep all of your work visible, all those construction lines, all those pencil lines, and give it your best shot.